First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. I wonder which stage we're at right now, because it certainly feels like a fight has been brewing. And since just a few days ago, perfectly correlated to one specific date, the actual fight against cryptocurrency has ramped up to entirely new levels. And quite frankly, there is so much going on that it deserves its own segment to analyze the course of events here and show how the stage we're in is an entirely new ballgame. And that means that crypto is on its way to one of the most massive transitionary phases in the history of its existence, and quite frankly, it signals that this movement is even more powerful than probably any of us had previously dreamed. You're definitely going to want to watch this one front to back, as it's packed with important context and value, understanding exactly what's going on with the attacks on this industry and what it really means when you pull back the layers and examine the underbelly of what's happening in the history of money, in the history of the internet. That's right, every day we show you how to get ahead of this market on the Elio Trades channel, and today is possibly one of the most important episodes we've made. So make sure you smash that like button and watch this from front to back. And of course, if you want to be ahead of every trend, like the avalanche trend, like the NFT trend, which we brought you first before anybody else, helping you get 10x's and 100x's day over day, then all you have to do is subscribe and put that bell notification on, and you'll be ahead of the game. And that's the absolute best course to success here in crypto. So make sure you smash that like button and subscribe with that bell notification on. With that said, let's dive in. On September 7th, 2021, what we saw was the first nation adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, and this was El Salvador. Now, at first, everyone was memeing this. In fact, I remembered thinking to myself, this really isn't that big of a deal, right? Because El Salvador is not that big of an economy, this, that, and the other thing. I was thinking about it and reminiscing on it. And what I realized is there's something incredibly profound here, which is that you have an objectively low impact nation, one of the poorer nations in the world. However, if their citizens start transacting in Bitcoin and by doing so, end up elevating themselves even slightly into a less impoverished state, start building wealth, start growing away from the dollarization that has kept them poor, well, wouldn't that be a very profound movement? And wouldn't that attract more and more nations to do the same? By letting the El Salvadorians win this experiment, as small of a nation as this might be, how important of an impact would that be? And what kind of a signal would that send to the rest of the world? Well, guess what? That's an experiment that clearly on September 7th, 2021 was something that the powers that be, whatever you call them, decided was something that couldn't happen. It just couldn't, because look, we had this glorious uptrend in Bitcoin over the past several weeks, and then what did we get? On September 7th, to the minute, the day that El Salvador actually allowed their citizens to start transacting in Bitcoin, we get a historic flash crash. This was not your average flash crash. This actually took everyone by surprise. Yes, the market was getting over-leveraged and greedy, but there are some coincidences that are just too eerie to ignore. Now, I kind of wrote this off at first, but the more that I peeled back the layers and started to analyze how significant and symbolic this would be if El Salvador's people started to be elevated out of their impoverished state with the new Bitcoin standard of transaction and value, well, that would be something incredibly profound. And you could see more and more nations hopping on. With every nation hopping on, making Bitcoin stronger, more resilient, more liquid, and of course, more valuable. So to be honest, the experiment in El Salvador is worth more than it seems. And to be honest, this is no coincidence in my mind that we're starting to see some violence against crypto at the time where it's actually breaking through and becoming a legitimate unit of account, a legitimate reserve asset, and a legitimate medium of exchange. And meanwhile, we had attacks against other blockchains. What do we have? Solana establishing a denial of service attack. The very same day, we actually had Ethereum getting attacked as well. And Ethereum actually withstood the attack way better than Solana. Take that information however you will. But what did we see? Attacks that were actually meaningful on the biggest blockchains in the world. Attacks on the price of Bitcoin, all within short order of this El Salvadorian experiment. We also saw the exact same day this outburst of sketchy behavior being claimed by Brian Armstrong as it refers to the SEC. Again, we've seen the SEC become highly active over the last few days, literally right the minute that the El Salvadorian experiment took flight. Is it a coincidence? Could it all just be a coincidence? Or is it something bigger? Is it a symbol of the times and the actual real stage that crypto's at in reaching true adoption and tipping into mainstream use cases. Meanwhile, we have the most important thing here, the infrastructure bill, that is currently not even being talked about because we have so many other FUD storms to worry about. And right now, nobody's even talking about this bill that is looking to label all digital asset providers, anyone who works within digital assets, a broker in the way that most banks have to register and deal with all these regulations. This is a huge, huge storyline that no one's even talking about because we're so busy fighting other FUD storms. Pretty crazy. And it does feel, once again, all too coincidental to be just an accident. And you have a president now buying the dip on Bitcoin. This, as the IMF warns, that adopting assets here as legal currency is very risky, right? The IMF doesn't want this because what do? They lend out US dollars. And if you have Bitcoin, well, maybe you don't need as many of those US dollars. Maybe you don't need the IMF as much. So you can start to see the actual channels of power, the halls of power that have controlled economically the entire world over the past 100 years. The World Bank, the IMF, the petrodollar, all of these institutions that completely had a stranglehold on these small countries are now being challenged. And this is much more meaningful than it even seems. And here we have a new regulator in town, Mr. Gary Gensler, who we were all hoping would take a very educated eye to the blockchain. Now it's starting to feel a little bit less like that. It's starting to feel like it's just going to be essentially a scrap where the SEC is going to kind of come after people. And it's really kind of sad to see that innovation is essentially getting clamped down and that we're not actually seeing what is by far the most interesting thing to happen in the last 10 years in technology to just get stamped out and get scared away instead of being embraced as this incredible source of new wealth and new opportunity, new jobs, new income. What we're seeing is effectively that the powers that be just want to silence this. And we're also seeing now sanctions going out to crypto exchanges. Now, to be honest, this is actually an exchange out of Russia, the Suex OTC SRO. I have no idea who this is, but apparently they've been facilitating, shady transactions. Look, if you're going to go after people who are facilitating money laundering or something illegal, definitely do that. But for projects that are just trying to innovate and bring new and exciting things to the crypto ecosystem, well, that is where it is really unfortunate to see. And we hope that we can facilitate a discourse, a dialogue with regulators that would allow for the new jobs and the new wave of innovation to have a home in the biggest and most prosperous countries on earth, which is the United States. So in September of 2021, we've seen a shift, a significant shift, perfectly coming in parallel with the El Salvadorian experiment with Bitcoin. And what's clear to me is that we are now in a new stage of crypto's growth towards mainstream adoption. And that stage was always going to come with friction. Friction was guaranteed because when you're completely overturning the way money itself is being viewed, the way transactions are being handled, the way essential halls of power and institutions are being able to actually have the ability to govern, well, that in and of itself is a cause for friction. So this was an expected phase, but now that it's here, it's important you realize the only reason that there is all this action, that there is all this enforcement, that there is all this fighting going on is because of how significant crypto is and how much it means. This, to me, validates every single assumption and belief I've ever had in the crypto ecosystem about Bitcoin, about altcoins, about Web3. And to me, it means that this is even bigger potentially than I had ever dreamed it would be. But bear in mind, the next few months, maybe even years of friction will lead to decades and decades of prosperity. And eventually, the way these systems are built is to win over centralized power structures. So in the end, crypto will win. Getting to that point might be an extremely, extremely difficult affair. With that said, I'm optimistic as always that innovation and good-intentioned people building interesting technology will always have a beacon of light and will shine a light on the optimism of the future. Now that said, it's time to buckle up because there is turbulence on the horizon here. And I believe genuinely that what we're building here, the communities, will be able to connect and bring these institutions into the light and see that they will prosper even more by adopting and investing in and embracing this movement. But know for right now, they've laughed at us, they've ignored us, but now they're fighting the crypto movement. And you know what happens after they fight you. Well, they're acknowledging it, they're legitimizing it, they're giving it a pathway for legislation, and eventually, crypto will win. With that said, I hope you got some value out of today's episode. If you did, smash that like button. And remember, each and every day, we're bringing you the best information in the entire space. So make sure you subscribe with that bell notification on. As always, I'm Elio Trades. You can find me on Twitter at Elio Trades. The link is in the description. I'll see you very soon on the next episode.